A friendly memory is warm because the rememberer loved the person remembered. A hostile memory is cold because the rememberer did not. A neutral memory is cold because the rememberer did not care one way or the other. Outside the warm circle of love, some did notice him. Less than the warm circle wishes. More than the cold critics claim. Enough that an honest historian, working 2,000 years later with a candle and a magnifying glass, can find him in records that did not want to keep him. Josephus is the main name. Josephus was a Jewish historian who worked under Roman patronage at the end of the 1st century. He had survived the Jewish war by surrendering at the right moment, and had then made himself useful to the Flavian emperors as a chronicler of Jewish history for a Greek and Latin-reading audience. His books, The Jewish War and the Antiquities of the Jews, were the kind written by a man trying to be useful to both halves of an audience and partly trusted by neither. He wrote 2 large works. In the Antiquities, written in the 90s of the 1st century, roughly 60 years after the crucifixion, he mentions Jesus twice. The first mention is a single paragraph, and the text has been worked on by later Christian hands. It survives in one form. A paragraph that calls Jesus the Christ, says he did wonderful works, mentions the crucifixion under Pilate, and asserts that he appeared alive on the 3rd day. No Roman client writing under Flavian patronage would have written that paragraph in those exact words. The paragraph is too friendly. The cautious consensus is, he wrote something. He noted that Jesus was a teacher crucified under Pilate at the suggestion of the leading men, and that the movement continued after the killing. The underlying core is the part the Christian editor would have had no reason to invent, because the editor wanted more than that, not less. The second mention is shorter and cleaner. Josephus refers to a man named James who is the brother of Jesus called Christ. The passage is about James's execution by stoning around the year 62, ordered by a high priest named Ananus, an event that even Josephus's hostile audience could verify. This passage scholars trust more because it is offhand. It is the way a historian says the brother of so-and-so, when so-and-so is already known to the reader without further explanation. A forger inserting a line about Jesus into a Josephus passage would have written a paragraph, not a clause. The clause is offhand precisely because it is not promoting anything. It is identifying which James. It tells us that by the year 93, when Josephus was writing, Jesus called Christ was a publicly identifiable name that a Jewish historian could use to anchor another Jewish man without further explanation. That second mention is a cold record. It is a cold record because Josephus did not love Jesus. Josephus had no particular reason to invent the line. He needed Jesus only as a referent to identify which James he meant. If the entire Jesus movement had been a forgery of later centuries, the offhand line would not exist, because Josephus would have had no reason to mention an obscure executed teacher who, in this scenario, did not yet have followers attaching his name to other Jewish executions in the year 62. That is what cold records do. They confirm without endorsing. Tacitus is the other large name. He was a Roman historian writing in the early 2nd century, roughly the 110s, or about 80 years after the crucifixion. He was no friend of Christians, no friend of Jews, no friend of any provincial movement that complicated Roman governance. He was an aristocrat writing for aristocrats. His audience was the senatorial class of imperial Rome. His subject in the relevant passage was the great fire of Rome under Nero in the year 64, and the way Nero, to deflect blame from himself, had blamed a hated sect. In Annals 15:44, Tacitus writes that to dispel the rumor that he had set the fire himself, Nero fastened the guilt on the people called Christians, who were already hated for their abominations. The name Christian, Tacitus says, comes from one Christus, who in the reign of Tiberius suffered the extreme penalty at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. He describes the executions Nero ordered, the burning, the wild beasts, the crucifixions, and notes that, although the Christians were guilty and deserved punishment in his view, even his fellow Romans were moved to pity by Nero's cruelty. A hostile witness who confirms the same basic fact is more powerful than a friendly witness who tells you the same thing. The friendly witness might be telling you because he loves the man. The hostile witness has no reason to tell you anything. If a man who despises a movement still records that the movement began with a specific execution under a specific governor at a specific time, that record is gold for the historian. It is gold because the cost to the recorder of being wrong is too high. Tacitus would not have invented Christus or Pilate or the executions under Nero. Each of those was a fact in the public Roman archives of his own city, and Tacitus could be checked by any senator who cared to walk to the archive. Tacitus did not love us. Tacitus confirmed us. He also tells us something subtler. He calls the movement a destructive superstition and says it broke out again, not only in Judea, where the mischief began, but even at Rome. That phrasing, broke out again, is the phrasing of a historian who knows the movement had been knocked down by the crucifixion of its founder and had nevertheless reasserted itself. The reassertion was the thing he could not account for. Political resistance dies when the leader dies. Religious resistance with a still-named founder is a different animal, and Tacitus had the historian's instinct to name it differently even when he did not believe it. There are other smaller records. Pliny the Younger, around 112, writes from Bithynia Pontus to the Emperor Trajan asking for guidance on how to handle Christians. His letter is a working administrator's letter, a man asking his boss what the procedure should be. Pliny says he has been interrogating people accused of being Christians, that they recite a fixed form of words about Christ as to a god, that they meet at dawn to sing and to share a meal, and that this contagion of superstition has spread through the cities and the countryside, with temples nearly deserted and the demand for sacrificial animals collapsing. He notes that many of those accused had been Christians long ago and had since fallen away, easy to prove by their willingness to sacrifice to the emperor's image. The current ones would not. The record is gold to us because Pliny had no reason to lie to his emperor about a problem he was trying to solve. Suetonius, writing his Lives of the Caesars around 120, mentions that Claudius expelled the Jews from Rome because they were continually making disturbances at the instigation of one Chrestus. The spelling is contested. Most scholars hear in Chrestus a reference to Christus. The expulsion is independently attested in Acts 18:2, where Paul meets Aquila and Priscilla, who have just been expelled from Rome by that order. If Suetonius's Chrestus is the Christ of the Christian movement, then within about 15 years of the crucifixion, the Roman Jewish community was disturbed enough by debate about Jesus that the emperor expelled them. That is a very short timeline. The Talmud has scattered references, some later, some disputed, some probably referring to Jesus through a hostile lens. The Talmudic references are mostly polemical. They accuse him of sorcery. They put his execution on the eve of Passover. They note that he had disciples. Like Tacitus, the Talmudic compilers had no reason to invent him. Unlike Tacitus, they had their own deep stake in disagreeing with the Christian movement. Their hostile testimony is therefore especially valuable for confirming the things they would have most wanted to deny. That he existed, that he had disciples, that the disciples kept his name alive. Mara bar Serapion, a Stoic philosopher in Syria writing perhaps in the 70s or later, writes a letter to his son from prison in which he asks rhetorically what good came to the Athenians from killing Socrates, or to the Samians from killing Pythagoras, or to the Jews from killing their wise king. He does not name Jesus. The wise king is identified by context. The letter is private, philosophical, and unrelated to the Christian movement's own writings. It is the kind of stray sentence a historian treasures, an outside observer in another country, decades after the events, taking the killing of Jesus as a known fact and putting it in a list with the killing of Socrates. These are the cold records the public archives of two empires preserved. There are more. The smaller mentions multiply if you sit with the dust long enough. Lucian of Samosata in the 2nd century mocks the Christians and inadvertently describes their founder as a crucified sophist who had introduced new rites and whose followers worshipped him. Celsus, a pagan philosopher writing late in the 2nd century, attacks the Christian movement and in his attack repeatedly assumes the historical existence of Jesus, his execution, and his disciples. Celsus's argument is not that Jesus did not exist, but that Jesus was an unworthy savior, which is a fight one cannot have without conceding the existence of the man one is fighting about. Together, these cold records do a specific kind of work. They say, he existed. They say he was killed by Pilate. They say, a movement continued after him. They do not say he was raised. That last claim is not in the cold records. The cold records do not testify to the resurrection because the resurrection is a friendly claim. It is something only the warm circle would have witnessed and only the warm circle would have written down. This is where the reader has to make a decision. The friendly witness says, I saw him alive after. The cold witness says, something is going on with these people that I cannot explain except that they will not stop saying he is alive. The friendly witness is willing to die for the testimony. The cold witness is willing to kill the testifiers. When a movement of friendly witnesses is willing to die at the hands of cold witnesses who are willing to kill them, and the dying does not stop the testimony, and the cold witnesses themselves end up recording that the testimony continues, that is the data the historian has on hand. What the historian does with that data is, in the end, a personal decision. I am not a historian. I am a witness and an old one writing through a 12-year-old's hand at this point in my life. The cold records and the warm records together draw a shape that is recognizable. The shape is a man who lived, was killed, and was witnessed alive after. The shape is also a movement that has not stopped naming him. You can read the shape as a lie kept alive by stubborn people. You can read the shape as a truth kept alive by witnesses. The records will not decide for you. The question is older than this book and will outlast it. The records do not prove. They invite. They invite the reader to ask why friendly, hostile, neutral, and official witnesses all agree that something happened, and to decide whether the warmth of the friendly is evidence or bias, and whether the coldness of the hostile is evidence of nothing there or only of fire one did not want to warm one's hands over. I have lived to see some of these records written. I will not live to see the arguments they will produce. Hosea is sleeping in the next room.